Loud music reverberated through the room, mixing with the buzz of laughter and clinking glasses. It was a night to celebrate, or at least it should have been. I was there, standing, with an empty glass in my hand and my heart sinking in my chest. My gaze moved across the crowd to the dance floor, where she moved as if the world around her didn't exist. Every step, every turn, every laugh that escaped her lips cut like a blade. But the final blow came when her eyes met mine. Froze. And in an instant, I knew. I knew this wasn't just a dance. It was something more. Something I shouldn't be seeing. Beside her, the man she was dancing with didn't try to hide his discomfort. His hands still rested on her waist, possessive, as if they had been there many times before. He took a step away, but it was too late. Time seemed to slow down as I took in what my eyes were screaming at my mind to accept. I tried to convince myself that I was wrong. Maybe it was just an acquaintance. Maybe I was interpreting everything wrong. But the blush on her cheeks, the way the smile died on her lips, and the silence that followed between us said otherwise. The man next to her looked away, and in that moment I knew. I knew he was more than a stranger. The air in the hall seemed thin. The sound of the music became muffled, as if my own body was isolating me from the world around me. I forced myself to walk towards them, each step echoing like a drum in my chest. She tried to say something, but the words died before they could escape. The man took a step back, trying to disappear into the crowd, but I didn't allow it. Who is he? My voice was firmer than I expected, but inside I was shaking. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. It was he who spoke first, with a voice full of nervousness. I think I better go. I didn't let it. I grabbed his arm before he could take another step. You're not going anywhere. Her eyes filled with tears, but that wasn't what stopped me. It was his look. The look of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And that he knew he had been caught. The room was suddenly no longer the same. The bright lights and happy sound were just a facade for the storm raging inside me. I didn't know if I should scream, cry or get out of there. But leaving didn't seem like an option. Not after seeing the way he held her hand before letting go. Not after seeing the terror in her eyes and the absent regret in his. Treason was not just a suspicion. It was real. It was in front of me. I could feel it in every beat of my racing heart. She finally tried to speak. It's not what you think. But the words were empty. Because I knew. I knew exactly what was happening. And that's when the penny dropped. This was not a momentary discovery. It wasn't a one-night stand. It was something that had a history, something that had been going on behind my back for long enough for it to be normal for them. Enough time to turn her into a walking lie. How long has it been? I asked, and the silence that followed was louder than any answer. The man tried to intervene, tried to explain himself, but I didn't even look at him. My hands were shaking, and my breathing was heavy as if I was being suffocated. She tried to touch my arm, but I backed away. Don't you dare. The fear in her eyes finally showed, but it wasn't fear of losing me. It was fear of the consequences. And in that moment I knew that nothing she said would make a difference. I looked around. Curious eyes began to focus on us. Murmurs ran through the hall like wildfire. And suddenly, I didn't want to be there anymore. I needed to get out before the weight of the moment crushed me. But leaving would mean leaving it like that. Let them escape. Letting the humiliation I felt stay with me alone. I clenched my fists. No. It wouldn't end like this. They had to know. Everyone had to know what was happening. I took a step back and raised my voice. This man, I pointed at him, making him step back even further. This man is my wife's lover. Silence fell like thunder. She let out a sob. He turned pale. And I felt the tension spread through the room like electricity. But what happened next was what changed everything. Because in that moment, while I was waiting for tears or apologies or screams, she did something I never expected. Something that left me floored and turned that night into something even darker. And it was there, in that split second, that I realized that the betrayal was just the beginning. Because what was coming was something I never would have imagined. Something that would make that revelation seem like just the prologue of a much more devastating story. Welcome to the channel where the truth about betrayal is revealed in a brutal and uncensored way. Here, we do not and will never support any form of betrayal. Our stories are fictional, but they carry powerful lessons about how infidelity can destroy lives, hearts, and entire families. Get ready to dive into an intense narrative, full of secrets, twists, and emotions. Take a deep breath. The story you are about to hear will move you. Happy listening. The golden light of the setting sun filtered through the white linen curtains, casting soft shadows across the walls of the large hall. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee still hung in the air, mixing with the light scent of fresh flowers arranged on the table. On the brown leather sofa, Ethan watched his hands, their fingers intertwined and restless, a habit he had tried to hide since he was a teenager. He's always been like this, a meticulous man, used to keeping everything under control. At 38, his life seemed to be exactly where he imagined it would be, a stable marriage, a solid career as a financial consultant, and an impeccable home in a well-located neighborhood. He was proud of the life he had built. And, of course, proud of her. Sophia has always been the type of woman who attracts attention without needing any effort. His smile lit up any room, and his light manner made everyone want to be around him. When they met nearly a decade earlier, Ethan was fascinated by her spontaneity. She was different from any woman he had ever met, vibrant, full of dreams and possessed of a subtle beauty that seemed to blossom more every year. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but who could say that any was? They had their difficult moments, arguments over small things, schedule mismatches, and even periods of uncomfortable silence. But none of that seemed enough to shake them. At least that's what Ethan believed. As he looked at the clock on the wall, the hands moved slowly, as if challenging his patience. Sophia had left early to help organize a friend's birthday party, an event for which he had no enthusiasm. Ethan was never a fan of crowds, nor of dancing, but he would accompany Sophia, as he always did. For him, her smile upon seeing him arrive was more than reward enough. That afternoon, as she got ready in her room, Ethan watched her in silence. She was wearing a tight red dress, the fabric sliding over her curves as if it had been custom-made. Her blonde hair was tied up in a simple but elegant bun, and the pearl earrings he had given her for her last birthday sparkled in the lamplight. "You look beautiful," he said, and she smiled. "I need to be, don't I? After all, it is an important party." Her response sounded playful, but something about the way she looked away bothered him for a brief moment. He shook the thought away as quickly as it came. Sophia was radiant, and he didn't want to ruin that moment with silly insecurities. Night fell, and the party was filled with voices, music and laughter. Ethan stayed close to Sophia at first, greeting acquaintances and politely answering questions about work. But, over time, he noticed that she was gradually moving away, moving among the guests as if she belonged to that environment more than he ever would. He admired her for that. She knew how to talk, she knew how to listen, and she knew how to make people feel special. And perhaps that was what made him feel, from time to time, that he wasn't up to her. It was a thought that appeared like a whisper on silent nights, but that he always dispelled with logical arguments. They were happy. They had stability. And she loved him, he was sure of that. Around midnight, Ethan was ready to suggest they leave. He felt tired and uncomfortable in that crowded environment. But when his eyes searched for Sophia, he didn't find her. She was not where he had last seen her. He walked around the room, dodging groups of excited people. On the balcony, she saw a couple talking, but it wasn't her. At the bar, just strangers. Then his eyes caught her on the dance floor. Sophia laughed, her head thrown back slightly, spinning to the sound of the music. And I wasn't alone. There was something about the scene that made her stomach turn. He forced himself not to jump to conclusions. She was just having fun, right? But as he got closer, the details began to stand out. His hands on her waist. The intense look they exchanged. The way their bodies moved in sync. Ethan stopped. For a moment, everything around him was silent. There was no logical explanation that could calm the feeling that something was wrong. Very wrong. Still, he tried to take a deep breath, maintaining the self-control that had always defined him. But something inside him was beginning to crack. Time seemed to drag by as he approached, each step carrying an unbearable weight. And then, when Sophia turned her head and saw him there, everything changed. The smile disappeared, and the color drained from his face. The man next to her saw it too, and the tension in the air became palpable. Ethan stopped. His gaze alternated between the two, but neither of them seemed to know what to say. The party continued all around, but for them, the world had stopped. She took a step towards him, but Ethan backed away. "What is happening?" he asked, his voice firmer than he expected. Sophia opened her mouth but hesitated. Before she could respond, the man next to her tried to intervene. "I think I better get out of here." But Ethan didn't let him. "No. You stay." The words echoed in the silence between them. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest, but his expression remained cool, controlled. The night that was supposed to be just another ordinary celebration turned into something he could never have predicted. And as he tried to put together the pieces of the puzzle that was forming before him, an insistent question hammered in his mind. Who was that man? And why did Sophia's gaze seem full of guilt? Ethan knew he wouldn't find the answers there, not now. But I also knew this was just the beginning. A dark beginning, where each step forward could reveal truths he wasn't ready to face. The silence between them was dense, almost suffocating. Ethan could feel cold sweat running down the back of his neck, but he maintained his posture. His eyes were fixed on Sophia, who still seemed to be trying to formulate an explanation. The man next to her looked away, as if looking for an escape route. But Ethan didn't move. He was determined not to let this situation go unnoticed. The music continued to play in the background, drowning out some of the tension that vibrated between them. People passed by and took quick glances, realizing something was wrong, but not having the courage to approach. Sophia finally opened her mouth, but her words came out haltingly, as if she was afraid that anything she said might make the situation worse. "Ethan, please, it's nothing like you think." He interrupted her with a hard look. "So tell me what I'm thinking." She was silent. The man next to her tried to step back, but Ethan moved quickly, blocking his path. "You're not getting out of here." Ethan's voice was firm, but it carried an emotional weight that was difficult to ignore. Sophia placed her hand on his chest in a desperate attempt to calm him, but he backed away. Her touch, which had once brought comfort, now seemed to burn him. "Who is he?" he repeated, this time with more emphasis. The man tried to respond, but Sophia interrupted him. "He's just a friend." Ethan let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. "A friend? Is this how you treat your friends?" Sophia's gaze wavered, and in that instant, Ethan knew she was lying. Everything about her gave away the truth, the blush on her cheeks, her ragged breathing, the way she avoided looking at him directly. He felt his heart sink in his chest, but he didn't allow the pain to take over. "Not there. Let's talk outside," she said, taking his arm, but he walked away again. "Here's good." His words were cutting, and Sophia realized that there was no longer any way to delay. She looked around, as if seeking help, but no one intervened. People just watched, trying to appear discreet. The man next to her finally tried to justify himself. "Look, I think I better leave. I don't want to cause problems." Ethan took a step forward, approaching him. You've already caused problems. Now explain what's going on here. His voice carried more than anger. There was hurt. Despair. The need to understand how it had happened. The man hesitated, and Sophia intervened again. Stop. This won't solve anything. Then tell me what you're going to solve, Sophia. Tell me how you're going to fix this. She was silent for a moment, and then lowered her eyes. I can't fix it. Those words fell like a bomb. Ethan felt their impact reverberate through his body, as if the ground had opened beneath his feet. He took a step back, unable to believe what he had just heard. What do you mean, you can't fix it? Sophia looked up, and tears were already starting to run down her face. I'm very sorry. Do you feel? His voice sounded almost like a scream. Do you feel? Is that all you have to tell me? She tried to get closer again, but Ethan backed away. The expression on his face was a mixture of anger and despair. How long? He asked, and she hesitated. Ethan, how long, Sophia? A few months. He remained silent, absorbing that information. Months. She had been lying to him for months. Every kiss, every hug, every "I love you" in the last few months had been a lie. The man tried to take advantage of the moment to escape, but Ethan caught him by the arm. I'm not done with you. Ethan, please let him go, Sophia begged. I'll let you. After he tells me what I want to know. The man finally seemed to give in. We met at an event. I didn't know she was married at first. At the beginning? Ethan let out a bitter laugh. And when did you find out? He was silent, and Ethan moved closer, forcing him to speak. A few weeks later. And you still continued? The man swallowed and nodded. Ethan felt his chest burn. The weight of the betrayal was crushing, but there was something more. Something he still couldn't put into words. He looked at Sophia, waiting for her to say something, anything that would ease the pain, but all he saw was regret in her eyes, regret for what she had done or for being caught. He released the man's arm, who took the opportunity to quickly get out of there. Sophia stayed, but didn't try to get closer again. I wanted to tell you, when. He interrupted. When it was convenient for you. She didn't respond. Ethan felt short of breath. I needed to get out of there before I lost control completely. But as he turned to leave, something in her expression made him stop. There was more. He knew. But I wasn't ready to listen. Not yet. He left the party, leaving Sophia behind, but every step he took added to the feeling that this was just the beginning. Something inside him said that betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. And the worst was yet to come. Ethan sat in the car with his hands tightly gripping the steering wheel. The engine was off, but his head was spinning as if he were speeding. Sophia's words still echoed in his mind, each sentence ripping away a piece of what he thought was the truth about their relationship. Nothing seemed to make sense, and at the same time, everything fit together in a painful way. Months. They had been together for months. He stared into space, struggling to control his breathing, but the image of her dancing with that man continued to invade his thoughts. The intimate touch, the smiles exchanged, the looks filled with desire, all the details were engraved in his memory. But there was something more. Something about the way she reacted that night, like she was hiding something other than betrayal. And Ethan knew he needed to find out. Hours passed, but he couldn't sleep. Every attempt to close my eyes brought flashes of the scene. He got up and walked around the room, trying to find answers in the objects scattered around the house. The photos on the nightstand showed the two of them smiling, happy, as if nothing could separate them. But now those images looked like printed lies. In the morning, he made a decision. He needed to confront her again, but this time he would demand the whole truth. He went to the apartment of one of Sophia's friends, where she had said she would spend the night after the party. When she opened the door, the frightened expression confirmed that something else was wrong. "We need to talk. Now." Ethan entered before she could stop him. She tried to look away, but he grabbed her arm. "No more avoiding me. I want to hear everything." Sophia closed the door and crossed her arms, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I already told you everything. I made a mistake. I was confused." "Confused?" His voice rose, full of frustration. "Confusing is falling in love with someone else. But what you did was plan, lie and hide. This isn't confusion, it's treason." Tears started to stream down her face, but he didn't stop. "And there's more, isn't there? I see it in your eyes. You haven't told me everything yet." She hesitated, and the silence was enough for Ethan to feel the ground shake beneath him. "Sophia, speak." She walked away, crossing her arms as if trying to protect herself from what she was about to say. "He's not just a lover." Ethan's heart stopped for a moment. "Like this? I've known him longer than I told you. Much longer." Ethan took a step back, trying to process the words. "How long?" "We were lovers before I met you." He closed his eyes, feeling the anger rising like a wildfire. "And you never thought you should tell me this?" "I didn't think it mattered." She screamed, but then she lowered her voice, as if she was breaking inside. "Not at first. But then it was too late. And you just went back to him. Why?" Her silence was unbearable. "Answer me." Sophia finally looked at him, her eyes swollen from crying. "Because I never forgot him." Her words were like a punch to the gut. Ethan stumbled back, feeling the weight of what he had just heard. Everything they had built, the years together, the promises, the shared dreams, crumbled before him. But still, something didn't make sense. "That doesn't explain why you were so scared that night. You looked terrified, Sophia." "Why?" She hesitated again, biting her lip as if trying to find the courage to continue. "Because he knew." "Did you know what?" Sophia took a deep breath, the words escaping in a barely audible whisper. "He knew about the money." Ethan froze. "What money?" She lowered her head, unable to look at him. "Money from your work. The investment you made a few months ago." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What does this have to do with him? Sophia finally looked up, and the despair on her face made him shiver. "I told him." "You what?" "I told you. About the values, the contracts, everything." Ethan took a step back, as if he had been hit again. "Why would you do that?" "Because I was scared. He pressured me. Said he needed money. That I was in trouble and I didn't know how to say no. So you gave my life to him?" Ethan's voice shook. Sophia sobbed, unable to defend herself. "I thought he just needed help. But then he started threatening. He said if I didn't continue, he would tell you about us. And I panicked." Ethan felt the weight of betrayal shift into something even darker. It wasn't just a case. It was a conspiracy. Sophia had not only betrayed him emotionally, but she had also put his career, his future, and his entire reputation at risk. He ran his hands through his hair, trying to find clarity in the chaos. "Do you have any idea what you did?" She cried, but he no longer felt sorry. "I felt angry. I felt disgusted. Where is he now?" Sophia shook her head. "I don't know. He disappeared after that night. I tried calling, but he doesn't answer." "He'll be back," Ethan said, his voice cold. "And when you come back, I'll be waiting." Sophia tried to get closer, but he backed away. He finished. "You destroyed me. And now he will face the consequences." He left without looking back, leaving Sophia alone with the weight of her own choices. But as I walked outside, I knew that story wasn't over yet. Not while that man was still out there. Not while the pieces of this puzzle remained scattered. And, above all, not while revenge still burned in his veins. The cold early morning wind was blowing hard as Ethan left the building. He walked hurriedly, as if escaping from that place could alleviate the crushing weight in his chest. But nothing freed him. Sophia's words were still hammering in her head, each sentence a new stab. His betrayal of her. Involvement with money. The lies. Everything was mixed together in a whirlwind of disorganized thoughts. Ethan got into the car, but didn't start the engine. He stood there, staring into space, with his trembling fingers tapping on the steering wheel. He needed to think. I needed to act. His phone vibrated in the passenger seat. Sophia. He ignored it. Another touch. More messages. He picked up the device and, on impulse, opened the screen. Ethan, please answer. I need to talk to you. He called me. He said he wants to meet. Ethan's blood ran cold. He knew this would happen. I knew the man wouldn't disappear so easily. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain control. Then he dialed Sophia's number. She answered on the second ring. What did he say? Who wants to see me? Tomorrow. Where? He didn't speak. I just said you'd call me back in the morning. Her voice was shaking. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, trying to control his anger. You will find him. What? No. Her response came quickly, desperate. I can't. It can and will. I need to know what he wants. He wants money. She screamed, almost sobbing. And I have nothing left to give. Then let's find out what he really wants, Ethan said, his voice cold. The silence on the other side indicated that she was not convinced. I'll be there. He continued, firmly. I'll take care of it. Sophia agreed with a shaky sigh, and they hung up. The next morning, Ethan was up before the sun rose. His hands shook slightly as he made himself strong coffee. The sleepless night had left evident marks, deep circles under his eyes and a tiredness that seemed to sink into his bones. But he ignored everything. The phone rang. Sophia. He made an appointment at a restaurant downtown, at 6. I'll be there. Ethan, please, just be careful. He hung up without answering. There was no room for care at that moment. At 6 o'clock sharp, Ethan was outside the restaurant. Sophia arrived minutes later, her eyes swollen and red. He noticed that she was trying to hide her nervousness, but her restless hands gave away her state. He's already inside, she said, looking quickly out the window. Ethan took a deep breath. Let's go in. They walked to the table in the corner, where the man was waiting for them. He was relaxed, with a discreet smile on his face. He stood up when he saw them and extended his hand. I'm glad you came. Ethan ignored the gesture and sat down. What do you want? He asked, directly. The man raised his eyebrows, feigning surprise. Aggressive like that? I just want to talk. To talk. Ethan leaned forward. You destroyed my marriage and tried to ruin me financially. And do you think we're going to sit here and chat? The man smiled, but there was something cruel about that gesture. I didn't force anyone into anything. Sophia came to me. She chose. Sophia lowered her head, and Ethan felt his anger rising. You threatened her. He used the past to manipulate her. The man shrugged. It doesn't have to be like this. I only want what I was promised. You were promised nothing, Ethan countered. Oh, no. He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and threw it on the table. So maybe this is my invention. Ethan took the envelope and opened it, finding copies of emails, messages and even bank transfers. Proof of everything. This is blackmail. You can call it whatever you want, said the man, leaning forward in his chair. But I'm not leaving empty-handed. Ethan closed the envelope tightly and threw it back. What if I don't pay? You know the answer. His tone became serious. I will destroy everything. And I'll start with you. Sophia gasped, but Ethan didn't look away. You're playing with fire. And you're already burned. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sophia tried to speak, but Ethan raised his hand to stop her. I'll pay, he said finally. The man smiled. Good. I knew you were smart. But I want guarantees. I want every copy of this. You will have what you want, assured the man. As soon as the money is in my account. Ethan stood up. I'll call you tomorrow. He pulled Sophia by the arm and left before the man could respond. In the car, Sophia finally exploded. Are you going to give him the money? I'll pretend so. She looked at him, confused. What do you mean? He's not going to win this one. Ethan, I don't want you to do anything dangerous. He looked directly at her. I already lost you. I won't miss anything else. Sophia tried to argue, but his mind was already made up. Over the next few hours, Ethan came up with a plan. He knew he couldn't trust the man's word. He needed evidence against him, something that would incriminate him. The next morning, he called the man and arranged another meeting. This time, in the empty parking lot of an abandoned warehouse. Sophia begged him not to go, but Ethan was determined. When he arrived at the scene, the man was already there, leaning against the car. Did you bring the money? Ethan threw a briefcase onto the hood. It's all there. Now give me the documents. The man opened the folder and frowned. That's it, empty. Ethan interrupted him. The man took a step toward him, but Ethan took his phone out of his pocket. I recorded everything you said yesterday. Threats, blackmail. The man hesitated, confidence beginning to fade. Do you think you will come out unscathed? I don't think so. I am sure. The man advanced, but Ethan was prepared. With a quick movement, he pushed him back and called the police. Seconds later, sirens sounded in the distance. He finished. Ethan said, looking at him. Now you will pay for what you did. The man tried to escape, but it was too late. And for the first time in days, Ethan felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. But he knew that the scars of that betrayal would take time to heal, if they ever did. The sound of sirens still echoed in Ethan's head even after it was over. He stood in the parking lot, watching the man being handcuffed and placed in the squad car. I felt my chest rise and fall with heavy breathing, but the relief I expected to find never came completely. The cold metal in the morning air seemed to cut his skin, but he didn't move. Even though he saw the man being taken away, a shadow of uneasiness remained in his mind. Part of him hoped this moment would bring closure, but everything seemed far from over. The words spoken the night before continued to echo. The lies, the manipulations, and most importantly, the betrayal. Sophia arrived shortly after, running towards him. His eyes were wide and his breathing was uneven. She seemed to be in a constant state of anxiety, and Ethan noticed that her hands were shaking. Was he arrested? He asked, almost out of breath. Ethan nodded, but kept his gaze distant. And now? What will happen? Her question sounded like an echo in the empty space between them. Ethan knew he didn't have an answer. Now he will pay for what he did, he said, but the tone of his voice was far from resolute. Sophia took a step closer, trying to catch his gaze. And us? The question hung in the air, but Ethan refused to answer it. He turned around, walking to the car without saying anything else. He heard her footsteps behind, hesitant, as if she didn't know whether to follow him or let him go. On the way home, the silence between the two was deafening. Sophia looked out the window, squeezing her arms as if trying to protect herself from the weight of the situation. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the road, but his mind remained stuck in the recent past. Every detail came back to the surface, the looks, the excuses, the broken promises. When they arrived, Sophia tried to speak again. "I know you hate me now." Ethan stopped in the middle of the room, finally turning to face her. "I don't hate you, Sophia." His voice was firm, but filled with exhaustion. "I just don't know who you are anymore." She flinched, as if the words had hit her square in the chest. "I don't know either," he admitted, his voice breaking. For a moment, silence once again dominated the environment. Sophia approached, but Ethan instinctively backed away. The movement made her stop, her eyes filling with tears. "I ruined everything," he muttered. "I know I messed up." "Yes, you ruined it." The coldness of his words cut the air, but Sophia didn't try to defend herself. She just lowered her head, accepting the painful truth. Ethan sat on the couch, holding his head in his hands. "I spent years thinking we had something solid. Something real. And now I don't even know what was true and what was a lie." Sophia slowly approached, sitting in the armchair opposite him. "It wasn't all a lie," he whispered. He looked up, tired but also curious. "Then tell me. What was real? Because, from my point of view, everything seems to have been a theater." She took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "I loved you. I love you. This has always been real." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "Love is not enough, Sophia. Love shouldn't have allowed you to do what you did. I was scared." Her voice rose, almost like a scream. "I was trapped. He threatened me, manipulated me. I didn't know how to get out of it." Ethan stood up, pacing the room. "So you lied. And he lied. And he continued lying. I tried to protect you." He turned around quickly. "Protect? You put everything I've worked for at risk. You put our lives at risk. Is this protection?" Sophia collapsed. The tears fell freely, but Ethan couldn't feel sorry. Not yet. He knew that pain wouldn't go away so easily. She stood up slowly, wiping away her tears. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice low. "I'll leave you alone." Ethan didn't respond. He watched as she grabbed her bag and walked out the door, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Hours later, the house still seemed too empty. He walked through the rooms, staring at each object that once seemed to symbolize something beautiful. Now, everything was a reminder of what had been destroyed. When the phone rang, Ethan took a while to answer. He recognized the lawyer's number. "I got the papers I needed," said the man on the other end of the line. "Now all you have to do is start the process." Ethan took a deep breath. "Thanks." He hung up without saying anything else. He stood still, looking at his phone, feeling the weight of the decision. Over the next few days, he tried to keep busy. He returned to work, surrounding himself with numbers and reports that offered a temporary distraction. But at night, when I returned home, the emptiness felt heavier. Sophia's messages kept coming, but he ignored them. I knew I needed time to process everything before even considering a conversation. One night, when he finally decided to open one of the messages, he read the words that made him freeze. "I'm very sorry. More than you can imagine. But I need you to know that, despite everything, I have always loved you. And even if you never forgive me, I want you to know that." Ethan put down the phone and closed his eyes. He felt trapped between the past and the future, not knowing which path he should take. Deep down, I knew that story wasn't over yet. Sophia was part of him, even after everything that had happened. But what would he do with it? That was the answer he still needed to find. Ethan looked out the window of the empty apartment. The lights of neighboring buildings twinkled like artificial stars, but nothing in those lights seemed to offer warmth or comfort. The silence was deafening, and the echo of the latest events still vibrated within him. He had spent the last few weeks trying to rebuild the scattered pieces of his life, but every time he thought he had pieced something together, he discovered new cracks. The case against the man who had destroyed her trust was ongoing. The evidence handed over to the police was sufficient to incriminate him for blackmail and extortion. But Ethan knew that wouldn't erase the emotional damage done. He felt no satisfaction in seeing him arrested. I just felt empty. An emptiness that continued to grow every time he thought about Sophia. She hadn't been back since that night. The messages stopped, and he never tried to look for her again. But his mind insisted on replaying the conversations, the screams and the silences that weighed more than any spoken word. The image of her crying at the door still haunted him, and Ethan wondered if he would have acted differently if he had been less hurt. He opened his office drawer and took out the divorce papers. They were filled out, ready to be signed. But his hands hesitated. Even after everything, there were doubts. Could he forgive her? Could I believe any word that came out of his mouth again? Or was he doomed to carry that hurt forever? The phone rang, and for a moment he thought it was her. But the number was unknown. Ethan. The female voice on the other end was familiar. It is me. He closed his eyes, feeling the tightness in his chest return. What do you want, Sophia? I need to see you. He was silent. Please. Just a coffee. After that, I promise I'll leave. Against his better logic, Ethan agreed. In the cafe, she was sitting in an inconspicuous corner, holding a cup of tea. It seemed smaller, more fragile. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. Thank you for coming. Say what you want. Sophia took a deep breath. I need you to know the truth. The whole truth. I already know enough. You don't know. She interrupted him, leaning forward. And I can't live with that. Ethan crossed his arms, waiting. I knew what he was. From the beginning. I knew he was dangerous, but I thought I could handle him. He looked at her coldly. And you thought hiding this from me was the best choice? I was scared. First, fear of losing you. Then, fear that he would really destroy you. And yet, he continued with it. Because he controlled me. He knew things about me. Things I never told you because I was ashamed. Ethan felt his heart sink. What things? Sophia looked down at her hands, unable to look at him. Before we got married, I got involved with him. It was an abusive relationship. He manipulated me, made me feel like I owed him everything. When I finished, I thought I was free. But he came back. Ethan felt his stomach drop. And you never told me any of this? How could I? I was afraid you would see me as weak. That he would judge me for allowing that. So you preferred to let him continue manipulating you. I didn't know how to stop. Until it was too late. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, fighting the whirlwind of emotions. And now? What do you want me to do with this information? Nothing. I just needed you to know. Because I know I made a mistake. I know I lost you. But I couldn't let you think that I did all that because I didn't love you. The silence between them prolonged. Sophia looked at him as if expecting a miracle, but Ethan knew he had no more miracles to offer. I need to move on, Sophia. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. She got up, ready to leave, but Ethan held her hand for a brief moment. I hope you move on too. And I hope one day you forgive yourself. Sophia smiled sadly before letting go of his hand and disappearing through the door. Over the next few months, Ethan began to rebuild his life. He invested in his career again, bought a new apartment and met different people. Little by little he learned to trust again, but the past still haunted him. It was during a business trip that he met Emily. She had a calm and welcoming manner, but she was also strong and determined. The opposite of the chaos he had experienced with Sophia. Over time, Ethan allowed himself to feel something new. Something that didn't come with fear or distrust. Sophia, on the other hand, also followed her path. She moved to another city, started therapy, and worked to let go of the trauma she was carrying. It wasn't easy, but she found peace by learning to forgive herself. As for the man who had destroyed their lives, he was sentenced to years in prison. He lost everything: reputation, money, and freedom. And for Ethan, that was enough. Life went on. Scars remained, but new chapters began to be written. Ethan learned that love isn't enough when there's no trust, and Sophia learned that the truth, no matter how painful, is always the best path. Now I want to know what you thought of this story. Leave your comments sharing your opinion about the characters and the dilemmas they faced. And, of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Remember, here, we do not support any type of betrayal. Until next time.